Hi, so my name is Caitlin Fulton, and I chose to do the National School Lunch Program. I mainly chose this because my parents are both teachers, so I thought it would be something interesting to kind of look more into. So, first, what exactly is this program? It is a federally assisted program, and it operates in public schools, nonprofit private schools, and residential childcare institutions. The NSLP provides lunches to students every school day, and they are very, very nutritious and provided at a low cost. So, the NSLP is actually the second largest food and nutrition assistance program, and it is behind a program called SNAP, which I'll discuss a little later. Um, but through the NSLP, there are about 95% of schools that participate, and on average, they serve 30 million children lunches a day. And this has steadily increased since they began in the 70s. And so in 1970, it was 22.4 million kids a day. 2000 was 27.3, and 2016 was 30.4, which is kind of about where we are today. So, how exactly does the NSLP work through the school systems, that kind of idea? So, this program is administered at the federal level by the USDA, and it's their Food and Nutrition Service section. It's also administered at the state level through state agencies. So, for instance, in North Carolina, their agency operates the program through different agreements that they have with schools and school districts. So that's kind of how it works more on a state level. And through the NSLP, schools who participate, they receive a cash reimbursement for each lunch and snack that they serve to a child. And they also receive USDA commodity food donations that they are able to use for lunches. So the schools are able to decide what specific foods they want to serve and how those foods are then prepared. However, all meals that they provide have to meet the USDA's nutritional requirements. And so the requirements they have to meet, it's about 1/3 of their calorie, protein, calcium, iron, vitamin A, and vitamin E intake. So each lunch has to have 1/3 of that in total. And this does kind of vary throughout the ages, as each age group has to have a different requirement to meet. So there is actually this chart that I found that breaks up kind of how much of what particular food into how many servings. And this is per week. So for K through 5, the fruit cups are about 2.5 per week. So when you break that down to a day, that is half a fruit cup. And you can kind of see that trend throughout the rest of the different categories. And K through 5 and 6 through 8 aren't that drastically different. It mainly changes when you look at the grains and the meat and the calories and the sodium, but with like the fruits, the vegetables, the milk, the saturated fat, all of that is relatively the same across the board. The main difference is when you go over into the high school years. So it goes into 5 fruits, 5 vegetables, 10 to 12 grains, that kind of stuff. It's a larger difference. So that's very interesting to kind of note. And one thing I wanted to kind of point out is notice how the milk cups is 5 across the board for every age group. So that is 1 cup of milk per lunch. So I thought that was kind of interesting to kind of apply the knowledge that we're learning in class to an actual meal program. So now through the NSLP, they want every child to have access to a school lunch. And so they will provide free or reduced lunches to those who may be unable to afford the cost of just a normal school lunch. Now, qualifying for this is largely based on your household income. So free lunch is at or below 130% of the poverty line. Reduced lunch is between 130% and 185%. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And children can actually become what they call categorically eligible. And so they just kind of automatically qualify for a free reduced lunch. And it's if they or their family participate in certain federal assisted programs, which I discuss later. But it's also if the child has a status of homeless, runaway, or foster child, which I thought was very interesting and something that I would not have thought about just on my own. So it's really nice to see that that is implemented within this program as well. And then just a little statistic that, sorry, I had the hiccups. Just a little statistic I thought was interesting was that in 2021, the NSLP provided 2.2 billion meals, and 98.9% of those were served either free or at a reduced price. Now, I wanted to include this little graph off to the side. The blue bars are the total lunches, and it's broken down by year. And the red line is the percentage of those that were free or at a reduced price. So typically throughout the year, it maintains kind of at like a higher level. So more around like the 60 to 70%, 50 to 70, I would say, especially once it hit the like 1995 area, it kind of became a little steadily increasing as the amount that they served increased. But it's really interesting to see that when COVID hit, the total amount dropped significantly, as kids just weren't in school. But the percentage of those that were free or reduced price heavily increased. And I mean, a large part of that is just how COVID kind of impacted people and their employment. So it's kind of interesting to see. Now, I wanted to include this chart. I think it shows it a little bit better instead of 130% of the poverty line. I got it from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So this is specific for North Carolina. And this was in 2019. So I am unsure if this has changed due to COVID, but this is pre-pandemic. So it breaks it up by annual, monthly, twice a year, every 2 weeks, and weekly. So based on that form of payment. So it's very accessible to anyone who has any kind of job. And then you kind of look at the household size. So for a family of four, if annually their income is 33,000, they would qualify for a free lunch. And if it was 47,000, they would qualify for a reduced lunch. So it's very interesting to kind of see how it's all broken up and especially the difference between the household size. So, yeah. And one thing, or I'll mention that in a second. So how do you apply for a free reduced lunch? So at the beginning of the year, schools will send home a school meal application, and the child will take it to their parents. The parents will fill it out and send it back to school. So this doesn't only happen at the beginning of the year. You can apply at any time. So if there is ever a difference in your household income or if something happens, you are still able to apply and get it approved and qualify for it, free or reduced. So these applications are sent to the local school district officials, and they are the ones who review them and decide if you are eligible for free or reduced and which one you are eligible for. Now, like I said previously, students can or families can automatically qualify if their household receives or participates in other federal assisted programs. So one of these is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is SNAP, which I mentioned earlier. That is actually the largest food assistance program. So if your household receives those benefits, you're automatically qualified. And if they also participate in other ones, such as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, they also are able to just automatically qualify. And one thing to kind of note is that if one child of a household qualifies, all of them qualify. I feel like that might be self-explanatory, but yeah, especially the more children that you do have, the more assistance you are able to receive. Now, the NSLP had a positive role in helping food insecurity. Um, and so children who come from food insecure and marginally food secure households are way more likely to eat school meals than those who are from food secure households. And I mean, most of this is they just might not have the food to bring to school for their own lunch. Um, so versus those in a food secure household, they probably would. They would have more options. So this is why it's very important that school lunches are dense with nutrients, because those who come from food insecure and marginally food secure households, most of their nutrient intake is from these school meals, from these school lunches. I thought it was interesting to see how many children actually participate. So of those who are food insecure, about 79% participate in school lunches, and marginally secure, it's about 71%. So those are kind of relatively similar. And then when it gets to the food secure, it drops significantly to 49%, which is kind of interesting to me just to kind of view that drastic decline of this child has the option to bring a lunch from home. Most of these other children do not. Now, some barriers to participation in the NSLP, some are enrollment, outreach, but I think the main one is, or the main two would be the limited menu options and student preferences. So especially when you're trying to target the food secure population, having a limited menu is kind of hindering the participation. As if a student just doesn't like what is served, those who are food secure have the option to not, like, they don't have to participate and receive a school lunch. So I think that is a barrier, but that one is a hard one to kind of overcome because you can't just you don't want to cater to everyone. Um, Another one is lunch service capacity and open campuses. So with open campuses, if the school allows their children to leave campus for lunch, most children will, go off campus and go to a restaurant or anywhere and then come back. If you have the option between, the school lunch versus pizza from 2 blocks away, like I mean, I know I would choose the pizza, but I can definitely just see that as a barrier. And then one thing I really wanted to include was the effect that COVID had on this program. So participation in the NSLP heavily dropped when COVID hit, and it affected both the lunch and the breakfast program. So there is a separate breakfast program, and both of them normally kind of go hand in hand with the increase and the decrease. But when COVID hit, both of them took a massive decrease. Now, to kind of balance this out and still continue to provide students with school meals, the USDA issued a waiver that was to expand the coverage of their seamless summer option. So this is the option where students are able to continue receiving school lunch meals throughout the summer. So during COVID, when no one was in school and it was kind of like a summer period, they continued to provide meals to students who truly needed them, which I thought was very interesting to kind of hear. And this waiver wasn't exactly perfect, but it was at least the effort that was made. So throughout COVID, the USDA and the NSLP were heavily forced to kind of take a step back and reevaluate how the program has supported children and ensure that they meet children's nutritional needs. So I included this little graph just to depict how COVID impacted the lunch program. I mean, it dropped by 10 million children participation on average. So heavily took away some of that participation. And the breakfast one, it wasn't as drastic, but it still shows a decrease. And then here am I, we're excited.